All right, welcome everyone to West Center webinar series. Thank you for joining us on this great Friday morning. Last few weeks, we went over online presence, helping your company build up a strong online presence. And then Courtney took us through having quality online meetings using Zoom, webinars, things along those lines. So if you haven't seen those and are interested, either shoot us an email or go on our website. You'll probably be able to find it online there. This week, we'll be covering outbound sales. We know things have definitely changed with less in-person meetings and other sales tactics not necessarily being able to be as effective with social distancing in place. Scott here, we have Scott Peterson here, who's an expert in sales and sales managerial tactics as well. Scott's got some great insights into ways to stay relevant and stay in front of your customers during this time period, especially continuing that online presence and continuing that conversation with your customers, even if you're not there in person to do so. We will start with the fundamentals of outbound sales. Scott's going to have some interesting analogies here that we'll go through the different personality types and the different models, and then we'll transition into more in-depth insights that Scott has gathered through his experiences, and I'm sure he'll have an anecdote or two about his experience. And then from there, we'll go to Q&A where Scott can answer and field questions you all may have regarding your sales outreach. So with that, Scott, feel free to elaborate further on what you'd like to cover beforehand, but I'll turn it over to you.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Ben, and good morning, everybody. About that tagline, business development athlete, that's really something, right? And you're right to be skeptical about it for now, but give me a few minutes to prove it out to you. I've been in this line of work for 25 years, and I've held lots of different job titles. Among them, or handles or labels. You know, I've been called pimp, cold caller, telemarketer, sales executive, business development manager, marketing manager, you name it. The names change, but the expectations don't. People in my line of work do one thing and one thing only: we make it rain. What I'm going to show you isn't the only way to do business development, and it might not even be the right way, but it's the way that I've done it, so let's get going. I got this presentation divided up into quarters. At the end of every quarter, you're welcome to ask questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. And by the way, I'm trying to have this video recorded, and I'll have a recording available to all of you. You'll need to give me your email address, and I'll make an exclusive YouTube channel and maybe even a Facebook page if you want to discuss it later. The first part's about inbound versus outreach and the differences between them. The next part's about human resource challenges of outreach, and the next part after that is about two different outreach models, segmented and athletic. Inbound positions are also known as sales clerks. And here we go. I like using Mr. Willoughby as an example of our inbound representative. $11.25 an hour is the experienced version of Mr. Willoughby. Now, outreach, we have Mr. Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And you can tell by the hourly rate, and this is for an average Jordan Belfort these days, $37.50 an hour. That's going to be an indicator of supply and demand and the scarcity of people like Mr. Belfort. Now, here's one of the big challenges for the athlete's employer, Mr. Belfort's employer. Mr. Willoughby has no sales cycle at all. When you go into the store to buy toilet paper, you put your money on the counter, take your toilet paper, and you're good to go, pardon the pun. The sales cycle for Mr. Belfort is going to run up to and sometimes longer than 18 months. So that's going to be a real challenge for Mr. Belfort's employer, coughing up $37.50 an hour over what might be 18 months or longer. Business development athletes make that kind of money by knowing their customer, and that goes for their employer too, but keeping athletes around can be challenging. Now, this is one version of a management approach for outreach. You might recognize this guy. This is Alec Baldwin from Glengarry Glen Ross. This is classic carrot and stick management. I call him Mr. U because there's and you have to see this movie. You haven't seen this movie. Anybody ever touching sales has to see Glengarry Glen Ross. At one point, one of the characters in the movie asks, Alec Baldwin is lowering the boom. He has a stable of 4 outreach people, and they're kind of not doing their job, and he's got to get rid of half of them. So he says there's going to be a sales contest. First prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired. And at one point, Ed Harris, playing, I think it's Dave Moss, says, "Hey, what's your name? I've never met you before." And Alec Baldwin says, "Fuck you, that's my name." So I just call him Mr. U. This is the other end of the spectrum for outreach management. This is Dickie Fox from the movie Jerry Maguire. This is the inspirational version of outreach management. He says things like, he points to his heart and says, "If this is empty," and then points to his head and says, "And then this doesn't matter. And until you love everyone, you can't sell anyone." Now, this is a consequence of hiring in outreach, because of the scarcity, the relative scarcity of outreach people. Excuse me. You're going to find yourself on the internet shopping at places like LinkedIn, Indeed, Glassdoor, Monster, Craigslist. And there's a fair amount of risk associated with that, naturally, especially in the post-Zoom days where you're going to use more and more telecommuting support. This individual, I'm not sure if you recognize the name. This individual would have given a great interview, very presentable. This person could have been found on Craigslist a few years ago, but no more. This guy is also known today as the Craigslist killer. The CHALLY assessment is something that can mitigate HR risk for outreach. I just discovered this a few months ago. I wish I would have known about it 25 years ago. It's a personality inventory. Takes about 15 minutes to take. It's about, I think the cost is $250. It's all done online. It's kind of like the MMPI Lite. The MMPI takes a little over an hour to administer. I've taken it. The CHALLY assessment runs 15 minutes, and it's going to give you and your employer a good look at where you belong in the sales infrastructure. Are you best suited behind a desk making outreach calls? Are you better off sweeping floors or out in the lot parking cars? Building a sales culture mitigates risk in any company. The best companies I've seen are able to exploit things like the CHALLY assessment and build sales cultures so that you're not always wanting for human resources. You're not always, it's like you have people in place, you have people that want to work there. It's a fun place to work, like, the Dickie Fox model, or it's a profitable place to work, like the Mr. U model. But if you don't have a sales culture, you got turnover and you have risk, and you have Phil Markovs out there waiting to work at your company. Hopefully not. We're going to look at the difference between two models that came about around 1984. Before 1984, everything was athletic. It was a one-size-fits-all. People like me went out and opened doors. We closed sales. We managed the accounts after they came in. There was no segmentation whatsoever. Now, I don't know if you remember AT&T. It was a super monopoly. The Trade Commission broke up in 84, and it broke up into a bunch of little baby bells. And like MCI, Sprint, Verizon, to name a few, WorldCom. And what the baby bells figured out, and this is sheer genius and brilliance on their part, is that if you can break up a giant monopoly like AT&T, you can break up the athletes too. So for every Jordan Belfort they broke his job up into two pieces, both of them suited for Mr. Willoughby. So instead of $37.50 an hour, they're able to pay Mr. Willoughby $11.25 to be a telemarketer, and his counterpart would be an account executive. And it didn't take a whole lot of skill or demand, because there was so much business out there in the early days, right after the breakup of AT&T. Everybody needed long distance service. You didn't need a rock star to sell it. So that's where the segmented model started. And the bloom on that rose stayed around for 5 to 10 years. Next big change was the Gartner report in 2008. And this is the report that forecast the dawn of subscription-based software, also known as cloud, also known as SaaS, software as a service. What Gartner said is that everything's changing over from installed software to subscription software. And this created a boom for venture capital and demand for cloud-based software. So you had the same market dynamic where AT&T was in a seller's market in the early days. Pardon me, the AT&T successors, the baby bells. Cloud-based computing providers were in the same seller's market right after 2008, right after this report came out. On the other hand, Mr. Willoughby was in the same position, because what had been a handful of software manufacturers suddenly became hundreds of software manufacturers. They all needed salespeople. So they all turned to the segmented model. And Mr. Willoughby was able to take advantage of that. This is, I think, one of your great takeaways for today. This is something I just discovered, I think it was about 3 months ago. It's done by the Bridge Group. They've been around since 2003. And they really look at metrics, at this whole segmented model. They had really focused on the segmented model. Whatever became of that model, what is it costing? What is Mr. Willoughby costing these days? What's coming out of Mr. Willoughby in terms of productivity? And the results were, well, not surprising to me, but I think surprising to the industry. Now, Mr. Willoughby in the segmented model is making $37.50 an hour. In terms of output, Mr. Willoughby is doing 45 dials a day, while his athletic counterpart is doing 250. Now, when you break that down, you go, well, no, wait a minute, that's like a call, one dial every 10 minutes and one call every 10 minutes. What about the other 9 minutes? And this is what's happening. Because Mr. Willoughby was sort of thrown into this morass, he turned to a subscription offering called LinkedIn Sales Navigator to collect sales prospects. Now, LinkedIn runs, I think it's $1,500 a month. And you can get good leads, good sales leads by name and position and company name. But LinkedIn doesn't provide telephone numbers, doesn't provide email addresses. So Mr. Willoughby was left to scour the internet for that information on his own. And this is the cost of doing that. Because Mr. Willoughby's employer is paying $37.50 an hour, for that 9 minutes of downtime that Mr. Willoughby is collecting leads, each prospect, each lead is costing Mr. Willoughby's employer $6.75, whereas athletic counterpart is buying leads in bulk. And these leads come from companies that have been around for decades. Bulk leads come with email addresses, telephone numbers, head counts, square footage, a lot of information. And you don't have to waste a bunch of time looking for them. And they cost about 10 cents a piece. Quality conversations per day, also known as QCs. This is identified in the Bridge Group report. Mr. Willoughby was collecting 5 QCs a day under that model. His athletic counterpart was collecting 25. So it's the same yield, it's the exact same metric. And this is, I think, one of the most telling features of the Bridge Group report. Mr. Willoughby's average tenure as in the segmented model was 18 months. And at the end of 18 months, Mr. Willoughby got his walking papers. He was fired. And you might remember this amount because this is the optimum, or I should say probably the longest average sales cycle. So Mr. Willoughby's employer spent a lot of time, 18 months, $37.50 an hour, discovering that Mr. Willoughby wasn't qualified for his job and had to let him go. All right, any questions? Com check, anybody there?
You know, it's just us, Scott. We're the only ones with the mic here, so they'll pop it in Q&A.
Okay, all right. Next, I'm going to go into metrics and marketing. We're going to look at some metrics, some customary metrics. And this is, I think, what really separates the athlete from the segmented model. The athlete is going to be hyper aware of metrics because the athlete's really, got his eye on the prize and needs to understand where he or she is at all points in time, and that's where metrics come in. CLV stands for customer lifetime value, also known as ASP or average selling price. This is what a new customer is worth to your company. You deduct out all the cost of goods or costs, and you'll wind up with a number, ideally not to exceed 5 years, because accountants don't like anything more than 5 years. This is a number that should go on the corporate balance sheet under intangible assets, because you really have built something, and your athletes are going to know what this number is, because they're going to use that as a determinant of the effectiveness of any program. And the return on investment, obviously. What I'm looking for my programs is a cutoff of 10 to 1. In other words, I want to spend $1 to make $10 in CLV, and I don't want to spend any more than that. And the programs that I've worked on often exceed 10 to 1, but nobody believes you when you say more than 10 to 1. So I just say, did it make it? Did it not? 10 to 1 is a determining factor. KPI reports. KPI stands for key performance indicator, and this is something that the athlete can do for himself and his employer on a periodic basis. I do it for myself daily. I do my reports weekly for my employers. This is an example report. I do this in Apple numbers. It's native to the MacBook or the Mac operating system. I'm monitoring calls or dials, emails sent out, new accounts, obviously, things like that. And it's really important if you're gonna stay on the ball to know where you are at all times, and that your employer does too, because you don't want to put him in the same position that Mr. Willoughby put him in, and have to get rid of you after 18 months because you weren't doing your job. This is something that I keep track of, prospect inventories. As I'm building up a prospect list for my employer, I'm building up new accounts too. And I want to have a sense of cause and effect of what this is a graphic for a drip campaign, an 18-month drip campaign. The light blue bars, excuse me, the light blue bars are number of new prospects, and those which were dripped in this sequence. The little purple dots are new accounts. So what I want to see is I want to see a buildup of my prospect inventory, and hopefully some kind of yield out of that in terms of new accounts. And this is, I do these, I keep track of these weekly, and I always file them with my employer. Again, this is done in Apple numbers too. It's a 2-axis chart. This is a little bit on the geeky side, but sales cycle reports let you know where you are with respect to sales cycles. If you look at that top purple plus sign, that is an 18-month sales cycle. But you can see that here at the bottom that most of them are shorter sales cycles. But there's a lot of money on the table in longer sales cycles. And this is a good indication of why you should never give up, but at the same time, monitor your results. And this is a scatter chart from Apple numbers. This is probably the most important thing, is maintaining contact records. I work in FileMaker Pro. I export work in .csv, .xls. I can export it in anything. I always file these reports with my employer on a weekly basis, at least if he wants. I can do them daily. But this always lets me know where I am and what I'm doing and the details of what I'm doing. So if I get hit by a truck or fall off the face of the planet, my successor can pick up where I left off, and my employer has a little equity. This particular list, it's a 3-pager, is a program that I ran about 5 years ago, and I have macros built into FileMaker so that when I start a call, it automatically enters the date and time. And this is documentation of, I was doing, I think it was 59 dials in a half an hour. So I was actually doing 118 dials an hour at that rate. I think I could have done more, but I just ran out of room on this one. This is your fundamental dials or calls. One of the important cornerstone metrics. My average rate is 50 dials an hour. It's not that difficult to do. At 50 dials an hour, I generally have a 10-minute break at the end of my sit that hour. So I'll start the top of the hour. I'll get my 50 dial quota in by 10 minutes till, take a 10-minute break, and then it's top the hour, start again. I'll get 5 sessions for 250 dials. Emails, I'm working actually out of FileMaker. I do individual emails. I can do 100 to 250 individual emails in any given hour. Again, important metric. Quality conversations. I'm looking for 10% conversion on quality conversations. So for every dial, every 10 dials, I'm looking for 1 quality conversation. We'll get into that a little bit later. And of course, conversions or new accounts. And I wish I could give you a formula for, what you can expect or what, conversions, you should get. But I think if you just go to your CLV and your ROI, and you'll see what makes sense and what doesn't. Churn is the enemy of all SaaS players, all cloud players. And that's where your customers don't stick around. They defect, they leave. Often churn is an indication of a changing competitive landscape, or there might be some issues, customer service issues, product quality issues. Typically, outreach doesn't really affect churn, but outreach is always going to be aware of churn because you're always going to need to be adding new customers to offset the ones you lose. This year over last year, month to dates, really important. Again, this comes from Apple numbers. I've scrubbed the employer's individual name off of this one. And I file these reports weekly so that my employer can see what a rock star I am, blah, blah, blah. Scoreboards are going to come from the employer's accounting department, and that's going to be the basis for your this year, last year month to dates. And now we're going to look at some marketing. Well, there's a lot of confusion in this industry that I found about what marketing is and what sales is. It's almost like there's a prudishness that you don't want to offend somebody by calling us a salesperson, so you call them a marketing person, which is ridiculous. The name telemarketer is really misleading. It's actually telesales, because usually that person, the telesales person that was working with the baby bells didn't really have much marketing to go with. He was just straight, or she were just straight sales. Marketing is passive. It's the creation and delivery of content to support sales. Sales is active. Sales is or boots on the ground, people making calls. Now, it's true that marketing supports sales, and marketing is essential to support sales, but marketing is not sales, and sales is not marketing. And it's really shooting yourself in the foot to say, well, you know, my salesman actually half of his time is spent marketing, so I'll distribute the cost between sales and marketing to make my income and expense you know, look better, which is ridiculous. Don't do it. Reach and frequency is an advertising term where you're looking for the ultimate distribution, whether you're looking at TV ads, radio, newspaper, trade publications. How many people are you reaching? Where are you reaching them? How often are you messaging them? And this can be done with drip email campaigns. And this is actually, there's a crossover here where your outreach people can contribute to reach and frequency with drip campaigns. I've done that a lot. It's almost like a good drip campaign is more effective than a trade publication advertising campaign, and maybe to an extent television and radio on a cost basis. One of my heroes in the marketing industry, Hal Riney, he discovered back in late 1970s the adult literacy in the United States was declining. It was having an effect on advertising, and so he was an advocate of reducing the amount of copy in magazine ads. And there's a story I'm not going to go into now, but he was the first that I know of to become aware of that. I become aware of it right after the turn of the millennium. Text-only emails were doing fine as marketing material, but then that stopped. Around 2010, graphics were doing fine, like animated JPEGs and whatnot. But then that really stopped. And over the last 5 years, I've noticed the only thing that really works is video and high quality video. Testimonials are the best way, the most cost-effective way to reach people and tell them your value proposition. I currently use high quality video testimonials, and they work like a charm. Marketing spends are all over the map in the cloud space, particularly. But I know that early stage companies are looking at 20% of revenue and up for a marketing spend. Mid-stage companies are probably 10%-ish, 10 to 15%, and mature companies are in the 5 to 10% of revenue for marketing spends. If you're spending less than 5%, don't spend any money, because it's 5% really isn't going to make much of a dent for you. Anybody in fire protection or volunteer fire protection knows about a phrase called water hammer, and that is when you have a pressurized hose. A pumper is running a pressurized hose. There's a violent consequence when you shut that off, when you stop that pressure suddenly. You don't want a fireman near the end of that hose when it happens, because it can, you can get killed by that violent reaction. You'll see that in marketing campaigns. And this is an actual graph. I scrubbed the employer's name. You might recognize it as Zoom info in the upper left-hand corner. I worked with this employer. We built up a high-quality testimonial video campaign from, it wasn't absolute scratch, but we built it up. It did exponential growth twice in 18 months. It was doing real good. The employer did real good. He had an asking price that, at the beginning of the 18 months, and he got, when he sold his company to the venture capital firm that bought him out, it was 15 times his original asking price. So he did pretty well there. But when the venture capital company took over, they go, well, look at all that money we're spending on these testimonial videos. We don't need to do that. And the drop that you see here is what I call water hammer consequence. All right, take a break. You guys still there?
You're still here, Scott.
Okay.
And please chat in any questions you may have.
All right, we're running right on schedule here, according to my watch anyway. We're going to cover milestones and the initial call. Now, for any campaign that I'm running or program that I'm running, marketing development is going to come first because it's going to take the longest and it's going to cost the most, and it's probably the most unpredictable. And that is marketing collateral. You know, typically these days, I turn my video guy loose first, and then work off of his video. The backward sequence is, well, let's just get the sales department going and do the marketing later. And it never really happens. It never really works. I always like to say you'll never get a second chance to make a first impression. So get the marketing done first and get it dialed in. Prospect list selection comes next. This is pretty critical. And I do not use Sales Navigator. I have stories about that. I'm not going to tell them now. I use a list vendor that's been around for 50 years. I've been using the same list vendor for the last 25 years that I've been in business. What I like to do if I'm expanding an existing value proposition, I'm going to go to my customer and say, let's pick out your favorite clients, and then let's clone them into a prospect list. We're going to look for clients just like this in the whatever sector they're in, whatever micro vertical they're in, whatever revenue range they're in. If we're looking for a specific position, we'll match that position and develop a prospect list out of that. And again, what I'm looking for is a bulk list. I'm going to get my lists for $85 a thousand, and then we're going to get into initial call testing. And once the marketing is in place, and once the prospect list is in place, I'm not going to just, excuse me, I'm not going to roll it out right away. I'm a big believer in test and measure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a 50 call test. I'm going to take a 2-hour break, and then I'm going to do another 50 call test, and I'm going to measure those two. I'm going to look and say, is the yield consistent out of those? Is the yield what I'm looking for? And if it's not, I'm going to go back to the drawing board and I'm going to tune that call, the design for that call, and then I'm going to do another couple of tests. And it's really important before you even do the first 50 calls that you have a plan, for a contingency plan for if that doesn't work, you're going to do this, the plan B, plan C, plan D. And these are all going to be built off of adjustments that you can make in your approach. You can, if it's not working, there's a reason that it's not working, and you want to identify that reason and address it. If eliminate it, add to it, but planning, proper planning. Once my lists test outright, I'm getting, let's say I'm getting my goal is a 10% QC. Then I'm going to go into a rollout, and I am not going to be interrupted for a rollout. It's real tempting to get distracted, to pull a Mr. Willoughby and stop for after a minute of and do some research. No. It's important for me. We have on the North Coast here, the fishermen have an expression: stick and stay to make it pay, and they're out rain or shine, and that's how you make a living. And it's the same in business development. Once you get those tests done, you do your rollout. My minimum is 250 dials a day, and I always have stuff to do after that. I mean, that pretty much takes up 5 hours, and there's miscellaneous to do after the 5 hours. But a rollout is real dedication, and you do that until the list stops producing, until you've reached the end of the list, and then you start the process all over again. Follow-up emails. When I do a call, make contact. I'm going to follow that up at the end of the day with a follow-up email. It's going to be, hi Bob, thanks for taking my call today. We're a ABC company. We offer XYZ value prop. Here's a link to our latest YouTube video and another one to our latest Facebook page video. And I'll reach out again later. Real succinct. It's important to do follow-up emails and to make them brief and to the point. Once you do your follow-up email, each of those people, unless they tell you that they would like to opt out, they're eligible for drip emails. Every time I get new content created, I'm definitely going to do a drip my list, and I think drip emails are probably the ticket these days. Social media, I'm going to post the videos that I have produced on YouTube and Facebook. And if you have a marketing person to spare, and you're welcome to be more active on social media, but my bang for the buck is just post the video there, refer to it. You can monitor it. You can see how many views you're getting on YouTube or Facebook. But social media is pretty good bang for the buck in terms of posting videos. The follow-up call, if a prospect seems really interested in the value prop and they give me a buying signal, and that can vary, I'm gonna tag them and get back to them later. I'm actually gonna look at the people who gave me buying signals every week during that campaign and consider whether to contact them again or not. And generally speaking, probably 1 out of 100 of my prospect list should qualify as we'll call it a live one or a buying signal. That's where a lot of my conversion activity is going to come from. And once again, repetition. Stay on that. Once you do a rollout, stay on it. Don't stop until you run out of territory, and then do it again. Here's the breakdown on the initial call. And we're doing pretty good for time. For me, I'm looking for pace because I'm looking at that, 80 seconds is average. I want to be better than average. I want to be out the door in 50 seconds. So I'm not gonna rush myself, but I'm gonna keep my conversations really brief. And I think that people respect it because I think that all of my prospects get the sense that I have a big pile of prospects on my desk, and they're just one of those. People are more likely to engage you if you are busy. Like my dad said, if you want to hire somebody, find somebody who's busy. And so I'm always one for looking at a brisk pace. The manner that I use is quasi-authoritative. I use the forms of address sir and ma'am a lot. When I collect or confirm an email address, I will repeat it back to my prospect letter for letter in flawless military alphabetic, Alpha Bravo Charlie. And that reinforces the authoritative thing. I think I've had a lot of people ask me if I'm former military or former law enforcement. I'm not, but the manner works like a charm. The style that I use is, I call it the Candyman style. And what I'm going to do after I get in the door and I collect or confirm the email address, I said, I know you're busy. Would it be helpful? That's a big word. Would it be helpful to send you a brief email about that, ma'am? And they're just dying to get me off the phone. So like, yeah, sure. So I'll confirm their email address with them. And okay. Last but not least, what is your favorite ice cream flavor, please, ma'am? And invariably, she'll say something like chocolate. Okay, you can't miss my email. It's got chocolate ice cream in the subject line. And that'll go into my follow-up email. That'll go into the subject line of all of my drip emails. Content, whether it's voice or email content, less is more. It's very respectful. Lengthy emails is not very respectful to your prospects. It's kind of an intrusion. So I like to keep my follow-up emails and drip emails to 50 words or less. I try to keep my conversations, my initial conversations to, 50 seconds or less, and brevity, less is more. And this is an important measure of respect for not just me and my colleagues, but my employer. I want to keep good notes in my contact records so that if something happens to me, my employer can replace me. And if my employer is ever wondering if I'm actually working, all he or she has to do is refer to my notes to see what's happening, so that 18-month potential 18-month sales cycle isn't going to seem so long when you look at notes, the contact notes that are kept. And there's a lot less stress involved there, and it creates a lot better trust. I like to keep my objectives realistic. 10% QC, that's a realistic objective. It's nice to get those buying signals. It's nice to pick up the occasional account, but it's really the work. It's really keeping your objectives realistic, and 10% QC out of your daily calls is just fine. And now we're down to the final stretch, and we are right on time. Good job, guys. I got two groups here: pitfalls and riddles. The pitfalls are situations I've run up against and have solved to an extent. The riddles are things that I've run up against and I have no solution for. And by the way, you're all welcome if you ever solve any of these riddles. I'd love to know how you solved it, so please feel free to contact me. And even if you haven't solved it and tried to solve it, tell me what you tried, and maybe we can share that information. That's a big one. Teaching sales talent. One of my early projects was a toy company. It was a startup toy company, and the idea was to develop a territory and an account base in mom and pop specialty toy stores. We were up against traditional foot reps at the time, and then nobody in the industry was doing voice outreach to reach toy stores and sell products. But so we were kind of a pioneer in that regard. Within 5 years, we had like 85% of the mom and pop toy market. Landed a deal with a larger company that had a larger product line that they wanted to distribute the same channel. And so I was a one-man band, and my managers came to me and said, "Okay, we got this big deal. We need you to teach Mr. Willoughby to be Jordan Belfort." And I kind of scratched my head and said, "Are you sure that's going to work?" And well, they said, "Well, we don't really have any choice. This is what we have to do. So, this is your job." And it wound up that it couldn't be done. And it's pretty silly to imagine that, but sometimes people without sales experience or good sales aptitude can make mistakes like that. And the workaround for that, this is a company that there's a handful of companies that do CHALLY assessments, but this is one of them. If I had this to rewind, I would have gone to my managers or ultimately the board of directors with a request that everybody in the management chain, top to bottom, me and my sales managers would do CHALLY assessments to see who was qualified to sell and to manage sales. And I think that would have cut a lot of pain out of the process. Of course, CHALLY assessments weren't around back then. Straight commission. I run up against this one a lot. Nobody works for straight commission for long. You look at that 18-month sales cycle. I don't see how anybody can afford to do this. Moreover, if you're an employer considering offering straight commission, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. I belong to a number of closed Facebook groups for athletes and wannabe athletes, and we're always discussing who's offering straight commission, because typically these are the higher risk companies, and we really want to avoid high risk companies. So you want to be careful about offering straight commission, because like I say, you can shoot yourself in the foot. Typically when somebody comes up with an idea like this, I will refer them to PayScale Online. It's a good resource for average pay in the industry. And if you go to PayScale, nobody pays straight commission. Bulk email. This is something to consider. A lot of people are fans of bulk email. I worked for a company and we experimented with bulk email, and it was amazing the difference between personalized, semi-automated email that I was doing with FileMaker and bulk email. We're getting nothing off the bulk email. The real downside to bulk email is this. ISPs, internet service providers, have a big problem with spam these days. It's not just that it's a nuisance. It can contain malware. People use bulk email to do spear phishing. I'm sure that North Korea uses bulk email, and they might use some of the popular platforms to deliver that. Typically speaking, when an ISP or a firewall detects sending times, duplicate sending times, that's bulk email. So if you do a carbon copy to somebody, or a handful of carbon copies, no big deal. But if there are 100 emails with the same timestamp, sending timestamp, that's going to be a bulk email. And even more so if there's 1,000 or 10,000. So the risk of sending bulk email is that you can wind up in quarantine and not know it. The ISP isn't going to tell you you're on quarantine, but suddenly you're just going to see that, gee, I'm just not getting the results that I used to. I like to avoid bulk email. I use FileMaker. I have macros built into it. It's pretty heavily, it's semi-automated. Like I say, I can do up to 250 personalized emails an hour. I like to avoid bulk email. Silos, also known as turf wars. You'll see this in particularly larger companies, but it's you can see it in smaller companies too. I'll give you an example. In the case where my employer's company was acquired, this guy he's a friend of mine, and I really enjoy working with him. But he was all excited about this acquisition, and he came to me. He said, "Oh, yeah, well, that's this really cool company that's going to acquire us, and they say there's no more problem with silos." Now I know what a silo is, and it's like, your best friend comes, she's like, "I just got engaged, and she has no more problem with drinking." So I kind of had a suspicion then that the new owners were going to have a problem with silos, and sure enough, as soon as they took over, and we were kept on as employees, it was wall to wall silos. This was a company that acquired a handful of companies in our market space, so I was interested in knowing how the other companies were doing with their KPIs and their metrics. In particular, I wanted to know if they had playbooks, if they had plays that weren't working, that were mistakes, maybe they had a bad vendor, a bad list, whatever. I wanted to know what those were so I wouldn't have to make the same mistake all over again. And the same for them. If we shared information, we could bridge those silos. But of course, that was not successful. This is to be this is a resource, ClearAction CONTINUUM. You can find these people online. They do silo resolution. They come in, they actually have a platform where companies that have problems with silos, with turf wars, people not communicating within their company, people hoarding information, they have services to overcome those silos. Security, here's a good anecdote. Another company, this is an early cloud player about 10 years ago. This client had a little rocket ship, and I just started with them, and we were doing pretty well, but because we were using an online CRM, customer resource management platform, I was pretty security conscious. So I said, let's get OTP, one-time password security in place. And what OTP is it's, we have a system that's secured with one-time passwords. It's going to be easier to break into the CIA than it is to break into your system. And I remember we had implemented this this OTP, and he came to me maybe a week or 2 weeks after. I says, "God, Scott, what's up?" It's like somebody turned on the money switch. What have we done over the last week or two to affect this change? I said, the only thing that we've done is we've upgraded to OTP. This is what we used. Yubico. These little fobs cost, I don't know, it's like $10 or $20 each. You'll need a host. I think one login is a good host, but there are other hosts for your OTP security. And you put this on your keychain. You hit the little button. It squirts in I think it's a 35 randomized character password, and they're absolutely bulletproof. They're wonderful. Highly recommend Yubico for security. Micromanaging CRMs. The same employer. I was working on the CRM. The problem with the CRM is it wasn't telling me, I wasn't able to know how fast I was going, and time is of the essence. Speed is everything. So I want to know, how fast am I going? The CRM wasn't telling me. I said, look, can you go to the CRM people and see if you can, design this in, if there's any way you can monkey with the system to add this feature, because I really need it. And so it was a big company. They might have the tallest building in San Francisco. I'm not sure. I like to not mention any names. But he had to wait, and this is a small company. So my employer was also my tech support guy. He had to wait 2 hours on hold waiting for these people. And then once he did, he was able to get into the system that I was working on in real time. And they worked out the problem and, got a speedometer in. And he said, oh, look, my guy is doing 35 dials an hour. And their tech support guy said, oh, that's impossible. And that really tells you everything you need to know about CRMs. They're slow and they're brittle. And this is, back to FileMaker. I use FileMaker now exclusively. It's resident to my desktop. I've got, tons of security. The problem with micromanaging CRMs is that management doesn't trust Mr. Willoughby, but micromanaging the CRM doesn't really resolve the trust issue. I've run into this a couple of times in the 10 years that I've been in. I'd say in 25 years, I've only run into this twice, and both of them have been in the last 10 years in cloud. And that is where a prospect list was fabricated. And I suspect in both cases that the lists were fabricated by competitors to throw competitors off the track. They were working in fertile territory, and they didn't want any competition from competitors. So they'll fabricate a list to throw them off the track. The good thing about fabricated prospect lists, if you know they're fabricated, you can do a gap analysis to see what the company is trying to keep you away from, and go right to the fertile territory, in which case I was able to do in both cases. Info USA is a good starting place. This is where I started 25 years ago. I don't know. I get my list currently for $85 a thousand. I don't know, how competitive these people are with that price, but you get, bulk. Don't do bulk email, but get bulk lists. The number one complaint for that people have about outreach people and salespeople in general is, believe it or not, a lack of follow-up calls. It's like, Mr. Willoughby gives up after a while. If you go to the Bridge Group report, which I really recommend, you'll see that Mr. Willoughby is making 9 attempts. And that obviously wasn't enough, because Mr. Willoughby got fired after 18 months. So I've seen situations where I'm making 20 attempts and more and still landing the gig. And these are a handful of riddles. I'll go through these pretty quickly. People who ignore metrics. I don't really get it. It's like the slow skis on the Xfinity ad. They're doing circles in a cornfield. Why would you ignore metrics? But I still run into this a lot. Employers who ignore metrics. Free fall decisions. you're jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. You pull the ripcord, the parachute deploys. You look down, you say, shoot, I don't need this parachute. I'm just going to unbuckle it. And it's a free fall decision. I run into this a lot. The thing is to make your plans and get your plans concrete, do your testing, and avoid making those decisions mid-flight. Proper planning. I've run into this one. I've run into this one twice in cloud, where the owner is so intoxicated with growth. I mean, cloud is immensely profitable, and suddenly there's all kinds of money coming in, and the money is just never going to end, and people make really stupid mistakes. I had one guy who, and this is really, it's hard to imagine this happened, but it happened. So he hires me. I build his company up. We're doing exponential growth every year. We're in higher education. We're in healthcare. And we get this big request for proposal from a healthcare provider. It was like 30 hospitals in a chain. It was a giant RFP. And my client's all cranky. He says, I don't want to do this. I said, what's the matter? He said, well, they want 3 years of financial statements. I said, well, you have 3 years of tax returns, don't you? He says, I'm on extension. And my mom did taxes for a living. I know there's no such thing as a 3-year extension for tax returns. So I went to his the Secretary of State website in the state where his company was incorporated. He hadn't paid his taxes, and the state jerked his charter, and he lost his company. That's growth intoxication. I've seen this over and over again. And yeah, again, I don't have a remedy for this. If you run into it and find a remedy, great, let me know. Plug and play management. That's where an employer, you're doing a good job for your employer. Your employer says, oh, you're doing so good, you don't need any management. You don't need any supervision. And I've had employers that just let me go, and I don't hear from them for days, sometimes weeks. Management's really important. Once you get into this mindset of my employee, no matter who they are, doesn't need management, you got a problem. Once again, I've never found a solution for that dilemma. Pocketed playbooks. I keep a written playbook around, and that is my employer's property. I work for the rates that I get because I respect my employer. The playbook that you write, including all your mistakes, belongs to your employer. Once you pocket those playbooks, or once your employer pockets those playbooks, you got trouble. Again, this is one I've never been able to solve. Sales contests, the Glenn Ross. I can't count the number of sales contests I've been in, and they're always subtle. I'm not aware that there's a sales contest until we're well into the sales contest. Mr. Willoughby always gets pissed off in a sales contest and turns the company upside down, and that's always the outcome. There are no winners in sales contests. This is my last frame, DIY, DOA. Do it yourself. A lot of entrepreneurs want to do the sales themselves and say, well, if I just get a half a dozen accounts under my belt, then I can hire a salesperson. And this is really tricky because every value proposition is perishable. And you have maybe 2 years max before your prospects are going to look at this and say, well, this is a company that's really not going anywhere. I'm really not interested. You have yesterday to get your value prop up and running. So otherwise, I run into a lot of clients that have tried to do it themselves. They run out the clock, and then they're always trying to play catch up ball, and their company, I've seen multiple companies that wound up like this. And again, I've never found a remedy for this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try to get this recording. I'm going to try to get up on YouTube. Just drop me an email. I'll put you on the list so you'll have access to it. But shoot me an email either way, and let me know if this was helpful to you. And if you ever need a hand, just give me a call, and I'll do my best. And I'm almost on time. How's that? Where's that roaring applause?
Woo!
How's that?
All right.
Great work,
Awesome.
Scott. I know we had one question here from Carrie. Do you want to turn her on, or I'll just ask it, Courtney?
You can ask it, And then
Okay,
if anyone else does want to talk, you can raise your hand and I will allow you to talk.
Perfect. We'll turn on your mic. Scott, Carrie asked, thoughts on usefulness of CRM platforms such as Salesforce and now a bunch of new breed ones, Copper, HubSpot, etc.
I've used CRMs. I've used all the leading CRMs. The issue with CRMs is that the CRMs are slow and brittle compared to FileMaker. Not to say that they're useless, but in the case of the slide, the water hammer slide, it wasn't just that the video testimonial program was discontinued that contributed to that water hammer, that sudden decline. One of the things that was done is the company implemented a CRM that nobody really understood. Now, athletes don't like CRMs, and I'm the same. CRMs slow me down. I want to use something that allows me to keep it up at a really good pace. So personally speaking, I'm not a fan of CRMs. I've used a bunch of them, so I can't recommend one over the other. They're not going to hurt. They're better than nothing, but they can be expensive. I'd recommend FileMaker over CRM any day.
Excellent. Excellent. Carrie said thank you, by the way. Are there any other, I'll kind of leave a little bit of time here. I know you covered a lot of information here, Scott, so probably just processing most of it, as I'll kind of wait for a few questions here. But is there any materials, books, blogs, anything that you use to stay on top of what's going on in the sales world or sharpen your skill sets here? So what are the things you do to sharpen your sales skill sets?
You know, the real big takeaway for me in the last year was the Bridge Group report. It didn't tell me anything new, but it confirmed the things that it took me 25 years to learn. That's a really key resource. The CHALLY assessment is another really good one. Anybody in the sales business ought to run out for $250 today and take a CHALLY assessment, because it's just takes away a lot of potential pain and confusion about, you know, who you are and where you ought to be working within your organization. In terms of casual reading, I love Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. It tells you a lot about psychology and processing. People get a lot, you know, he talks about intuition. Intuition isn't really guesswork. It's math. The human mind is a great thing. And Blink actually helped me to understand that my prospects were getting a lot out of a 50-second telephone conversation. And you can get a lot out of voice. You can get a lot of information out of a 2-minute video, particularly a testimonial video where you're looking at a peer, you're looking at a client of this product, describing the value prop in their own words. You're looking at facial expressions, you're looking at body language, you're looking at nuance. And I can't think of a single resource for something like that. But any resource that you can get on metrics, I think. And that's where the Bridge Group report was something that really nailed it for me.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Well, I don't know if we have any other questions here. I think we could probably wrap that up. Again, we've got Scott's information here, so if you want to shoot him an email or give him a call, feel free to do so. Scott, any closing comments?
I think that's it. Thank you all. Like I say, if there's any way I can help, just reach out to me and I'll do the best I can.
Scott, I want to thank you. The Wet Center wants to thank you for the time you took today to be a part of this webinar, and thank you all that joined us. Next week we have John Sellup of AgStart coming in and talking about investments in the ag tech space and telling your compelling story as an ag tech startup. So stay tuned for that. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.